No one told you life was gonna be this way. Your job's a joke, you broke, your love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, even your year. But I'll be there for you when the rain starts to pour. I'll be there for you like I've been there before. I'll be there for you 'cause I'm there for you too.
Hey, what's up, Tommy? Here is the interview. How am I today? I'm fantastic. So, introduce myself. I'm Colin Marston. I am 37, and I am a musician and recording engineer, music composer, producer, mixer, recorder. 2019 has just ended. Which albums did I discover this year and that had the most impact on me? Well, I spend so much time making music, both my own and for other people, that I'm not always the most up-to-date on new releases, but two bands that I discovered recently that are not new, but made an impact on me were, one of them was the Australian band Dark Lord, which was a early 90s through mid 2000s symphonic black metal band from Adelaide, which was new to me. They'd just made one record. It seems like it was mostly written in the early 90s, but came out not long after the year 2000. And it's a great combination of symphonic black metal, hazy, super low-tuned Australian death metal, and Michelangelo Badio style mindless shredding. So it's a good combination for me. And both guitarists play custom double neck guitars to accommodate low tuning for riffs and a high tuning for solos. Zach from Imperial Triumphant actually showed that band to me, so I have him to thank for that. And another band that I came across, which kind of blew my mind, was Timeless Necro Tears, which is, I think, basically just one guy who's German but living in Spain. And he has about 100,000 albums on Bandcamp, and each one is more bizarre than the next. And I don't really think I want to describe it in any more detail than that. You just have to hear it. Okay, how did I decide to become a musician? Is there a special moment that I remember, or did it just come with time? I was always interested in music, and I remember always having fun playing the piano when I was very young. Just messing around. And I took some music lessons when I was a little kid, first on recorder and then on guitar a little bit later, but didn't really take to it at that point. And it wasn't until I was maybe in 6th grade or so, maybe around age 11, 10 or something, that I became interested in the guitar again, picked up the guitar, and this time enjoyed it and decided to, well, not even decided, just started playing it and liking it and kept playing it. So yeah, there wasn't really a decision to become a musician. It happened naturally, but it did happen, I think, probably pretty quickly around the time I picked up the guitar for the second time in like middle school years. And recording and playing music were sort of a simultaneous interest for me. So they both were sort of developing in parallel from that age on. A special moment, I mean, I have memories of things like being played The Rite of Spring in music class when I was very young, maybe 3rd grade or something, and it making a big impression and kind of scaring me but interesting me as well. And I think it was maybe my brother who expressed a regret that he hadn't learned a musical instrument around the time I picked up the guitar for the second time. And I do have a memory of being like, And so that might have been part of why I was interested to re-explore music again and totally fell in love. I have many musical projects and productions. Is there one that I am particularly attached to? I'm definitely not somebody who has a main musical outlet and then side projects. All the music that I make, I view significantly, I definitely have groups that I play with, like Behold the Arctopus, Kralis, Dysrhythmia, Gorguts, that operate more as typical bands, where it's collaborative, you write songs, practice them with the intention to play them live and record them for albums. Basic stuff that you would do if you were in a band. And then I have a whole other category of musical projects like Intricatheer, Glyptoglossio, Hathinter, Zazraug now, and a bunch of others which are recording-only projects. And some of those are solo projects like Zazraug and the Intricatheer, and others are collaborations, but some of which even play live, sometimes like Hathinter, but it's not music being written in the traditional sense and then performed. It's often music that has more to do with improvisation, but not always. These are projects that are just a little bit looser and a little bit less traditional in terms of how they operate. I guess if I was going to talk about anything in particular, maybe it would be Behold the Arctopus, because that's kind of become the group that operates like a normal band, but where I pretty much write all the material for the last few records. A couple exceptions here and there, but I've become like the sort of predominant composer for that band. And so that one kind of feels very special, because so much work and effort and time goes into that on my part and on Mike and Jason's part, and Weasel when he was in the band, that I feel like maybe that's worth special mention, just because it is an expression of my own ideas and aesthetics and so on, but it also operates more like a traditional band, and we do learn these compositions with the intention to play them live and have that be the sound. And there's a lot less messing around in the studio and piecing things together and so on, like maybe would happen with some of my other projects. What do I do when I'm not working with music? Tell us your hobbies. Okay, I pretty much just make music. I don't really have hobbies. I do enjoy cooking sometimes, but I definitely don't put nearly as much time or effort into it as I do music. I like movies and books, attracted to sci-fi a lot of the time, but I don't have anything in my life that's like music in terms of a passion that's significant or strong like that. I basically don't have hobbies. I just make music. How do you come up with your music ideas? How do I come up with my musical ideas? I don't have one particular method. I would say most of the time that I write music, I sit down with the instrument, whether it's bass or guitar, or war guitar for the new Behold album, and I suppose do what probably most musicians do and fumble around and improvise a little bit, and really just don't have any particular plan, but just play, and ideas come, or they don't, but a lot of times they do, and I record. I don't write anything down. I record small snippets of audio just on the computer these days as my notepad, my sketchbook or whatever, and then I either piece together a song from those pieces, or I learn each of those pieces and play it as a demo or something. But either way, I sort of write and make a demo as I write. And then if it's one of the more traditional bands, I would then learn what I had written. Maybe I had written this part of the song separately from this part, and now the goal is to actually be able to play the whole thing all the way through. When I'm working on like an Intricatheer record, I don't even bother with that. I just write in small sections and then it's done. That's the record. But for the more traditional bands, I'm going to be learning that material later, but maybe I'm still constructing it in the same method. But in terms of how the ideas come, I have no idea. I will say that I'm not the kind of person that just kind of sits down and writes and doesn't know what I'm writing, and then eventually I have a bunch of riffs and I put them together. More typically, I sit down saying to myself, I'm going to write a song for Behold, or I'm going to write a Dysrhythmia song or Kralis song or something. And I have that in mind. And it often helps me too to have a bit of just a very loose direction, or a specific direction, but even a loose direction is fine. And often that's the part I struggle with the most, is just starting the composition. Once it's started, it's very easy for me to just follow through whatever the logic was that started the piece and finish it. But for instance, often with Kralis, like Mick will say to me something like, well, What about a song with, where the notes aren't that specific, where it's more just noises? So that idea ended up helping me create one of the songs that's going to be on the new Krauss record, which didn't end up coming out exactly like that, but doesn't matter. It just got the gears turning, got the song started, and then I was able to finish it. So, yeah, I typically work on not necessarily one thing at a time, because I'm working on all the band's material at the same time, but I'm not sort of writing riffs on an instrument and then this riff, like let's say in 2 hours I wrote 6 riffs. These 2 riffs are going to be for this song and this band, and these 2 riffs are going to be for this song and this band. It's not like that. I do sort of have the intention of this is the piece I'm working on right now, and I work on it until it's finished, and then I move on to the next thing. Whether or not I might have band practice with a different band the next day or something, working on music that we've already started practicing. Yeah. So I don't know how I come up with my ideas. They're out there. You're, in my opinion, the most important person for the extreme music right now, and no one can deny that your work is not only a piece of art, but a big portion of extreme music history. How do you manage working with and in so many projects so different between them? Well, thank you. That's very kind. How do I manage working on so many different projects? I suppose I look at it less as a problem and more as an advantage to have lots of projects. What I've noticed with other people, and it's certainly true for myself, is that a lot of the musicians that I know that have a lot on their plate typically seem to be more productive. It's almost like the less you do, and the more you do, the more you do. And that's obviously a little bit simplistic to say, and a little obvious, but I suppose what I'm saying is that the more different drummers, for example, that I play with, the easier it is to play with a new drummer. If I was only used to playing with Lev, or if I was only used to playing with Jeff, because this is kind of the order it went in, and then I started playing with Lev, his style is so different that just staying in time, staying together, knowing where he's going to speed up and slow down and so on is very different from person to person. So playing with all these different drummers has helped me get a greater perspective on a variety of different collaborating scenarios. And it's made it easier to have lots of projects and to play with lots of different people the more people I collaborate with. And the more albums I make, the easier it is to make albums, because it doesn't, I have more experience and the decisions are a little bit easier to make, but also you start having a sense less that
this is the most important last statement of art I'll ever make.
Which sometimes people that don't make a lot of music have a greater tendency to put that kind of pressure on themselves. And that kind of pressure isn't helpful. It doesn't really make your art better. It just makes you more unsure about it and make it harder to complete, I think. Exceptions to every rule, for sure. But I think that if you don't feel like it's the last time you're ever going to make a record, if you always know there's going to be another record, then you don't get quite so overprotective and precious about every little detail. Because you know that even a record that you maybe made 10 years ago, that at the time maybe you did treat as your final statement and you got it as perfect as you could, your opinion on that record is still going to change 10 years later and 20 years later and 30 years later. You're going to be a different person, you're going to have a different perspective. There's some things about that old record you're going to really like and some things you're not. Guaranteed. So with that in mind, it's almost like don't worry about sweating every detail so much. Yes, do your best. Don't be lazy, put the time in that you feel is necessary, but don't belabor it, because like I said, your opinion's going to change anyway. So in that sense, I think the more records you make, the more it's easy to make decisions and be confident about them. It's easier to let little details that aren't perfect go, knowing that little thing that bothered you now, by the same token, might not bother you in a year or 5 years or 10 years. I also think a lot, because I record so many bands, and often, especially in metal and technical music, people are really insecure about accuracy and things being precise. And understandably so, because that music puts an emphasis on that aspect of it a lot. So seeing people struggle to just know whether or not they are okay with the quality of their own performance, and that unsureness and that self-doubt, I see that in other people, and so that also helps me remember when I'm in that scenario recording my own record to maybe not get so wrapped up in that, because I'll think back on a session I had with so-and-so where he was really insecure about the quality of his playing. And, you know, I think back and would be like, wow, he's a great guitar player, excellent guitar player. All those little details don't matter to me. And also when I hear, let's say, like a classic record, like Master of Puppets or something, and there's sloppiness in the drum performance because they didn't have the time and technology to make everything perfect like their later records would be. I really value those moments because there's a realness and a humanness and an organicness and a push and a pull, however you want to describe it. When it's not you who feels like it's a mistake that you made and you're letting other people down. When it's someone else, it's much easier to be like, oh, well, that was fine and it added some character. So that helps me when I'm in that position, wondering if that take was good enough or if my playing was good enough, to be like, hey, you know what, maybe that one wrong note I played in that passage there, maybe that actually will add something good rather than only being a blemish to be, you know, worried about and possibly removed. In all your works, your touch in the production is inimitatable. How do you get that? Okay, so talking about production. Thank you once again. Very kind of you to say. There's no simple answer to this question too, for sure. The way that recordings I do sound, first and foremost, I have to give credit and significance of sound to the musician who created it. I think that has more to do with the quality of any recording than any actual technical aspect of the recording. So I have nothing to do with that. I just hopefully put the musicians in a space that's comfortable enough that they can do what they do well and get good takes of their material. And then there comes into play the things that I'm actually doing, what microphone I choose or combination of microphones, where I place them. If they're using my drum kit or amps or whatever, then that's equipment that I have a pretty intimate knowledge of and can either make suggestions or I can listen to it and know if it's going to work decently in the final mix for what the type of sound they want or not. So I think I'm contributing sometimes on suggestions of the instrument to use, although mostly that's in the hands of the musician. Microphone choice and placement, microphone preamp, although that's pretty subtle. Any kind of initial processing like subtle EQing or compressing. I use a lot of tape saturation in my mixes. In my recordings. I used to record all basic tracks for bands to a 2-inch tape machine, a 24-track machine, and then I would dump the multi-track into the computer and then do overdubs like vocals or extra guitar tracks or things, and then mix in the computer. And then about, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago or something, my machine went down and the repair technician couldn't come for a while, so I started doing sessions straight to digital with tape machine emulators instead of with an actual tape machine, which I was very wary of for years because imitations of other pieces of audio gear, like amp simulators, for example, I've never felt comfortable with, and I feel like they don't work the way that I want, like real amplifiers do. An amp simulator is attempting to interpolate too much information. It's basically a fake preamp, EQ, power amp, a fake speaker, a fake microphone, and a fake microphone preamp. All of that is being simulated. Whereas with a tape machine emulator, that's one tiny piece in the chain. So real musician, real instrument, real preamp, real power amp, real speaker, real air, real microphone preamp, then a simulated tape plugin instead of a real tape machine. And what I noticed when I was forced to use those emulators instead of the actual tape machine was that I was just as happy with the simulation. And now that I actually have a really high quality tape simulator that happens to be modeled after the exact same tape machine that I used to have, the Studer A800 Mark III. I have the Universal Audio plugin for that now. What's cool about the Universal Audio stuff is I can track musicians directly through those tape plugins before it even hits the DAW. So it's the exact same sound, more or less, that I was getting before, with the whole stage of having to record onto the tape and then dump the reels into the computer and then erase the tape and then record on the tape again and then dump it every 15 minutes or half an hour, depending on what speed I was recording it. It ended up creating a huge advantage for me, and I could get more detailed with how much or little tape saturation I was using. So I think that's a significant part of my method, but also tape is the kind of thing that people put far more emphasis on in terms of it having an impact on sound than it really does. It's a very subtle difference, tape and no tape. And I'm using tape more or less as limiters or compressors for drums usually. A very subtle kind of compression that you don't really hear as the volume getting turned down automatically, like when you have a typical compressor. So that's what I like about tape, is that it's very, for lack of a better term, transparent. It doesn't really sound like anything is happening that's other than just the instrument being played. So that's why I think it's funny people say like,
oh, the tape sound, it's got such a particular sound.
It's like, not really. Like there's things that it does to audio, but I challenge anyone ever to take a blind listening test on whether something is recorded on tape or not, and I don't think that anybody can actually hear tape versus no tape. Maybe in a direct A/B comparison, there are small details that would lead you to make an educated guess, but I'm just saying if somebody was just like, listen to this album, was it recorded on tape or digital? You won't know. I'm sorry. You just won't. Coming back to Master of Puppets, not an analog recording. That album was recorded on digital reel-to-reel, which was a kind of recording technology which didn't last. But it even says, I think, on the back of the CD version of it that I have, that, oh, these original recordings were analog, and so, you know, now that we have this new superior digital technology, they might not hold up so well. There's a little disclaimer to the effect of that. And then I read a interview with the guy who actually recorded Master of Puppets and said that it was recorded digitally. So there you go. No, nobody knows. You can't tell. I'm sorry. You just can't. But it is a tool that I find a lot of usefulness from. But you can get to that sonic place in other ways too. So that's another part of production. I mean, I could go on forever. I'm very into room mics in addition to close mics. So your typical way of recording instruments in the studio is to have your instrument, if it's a drum or a guitar amp or a voice, and you put the microphone a couple inches or a couple feet away, and that's it. And then if you want more wetness, you add reverb. I'm not opposed to reverb, and I use it, but I don't use it in that way. If I want something to not be a super close, dry sounding recording, my go-to for ambience and depth and a sense of space is always a combination of a close mic and a far away mic. That, I think, is often something that people think is the sound of analog. Just a guess, but I think when people often hear a recording with loud room mics, with the room mics of the drums mixed loud, like a Steve Albini recording, you automatically assume analog because he happens to record all analog. But that's not the case. You could do a digital recording and have the room mics loud, and it would sound 0.5% different. And what you're hearing that's making you think analog is room mics, actually. And maybe there's more of a tendency for guys who like room mics to gravitate towards analog. That might be the case, might not. I can definitely think of examples that would support that and not support that. What else? I guess another part of production that's really important to me is not being in charge aesthetically. Deferring to the band, deferring to the musician, always. Having opinions when I have them about maybe this sound is better or worse or whatever. I usually try to feel out what the musician I'm working with, what their standards for themselves is like. And then I can help them decide if that was a good performance or if that was the sound fits their record or not. But I think it's really important to encourage people to own their own art and to direct it if they can. And I'm just here to help. And if you want me to make decisions as the way that I help, I can. But I'm not the kind of guy who's like, I'm the producer, I'm in charge, this is going to sound better, even if you don't think it is, you should do this. I find that not really a cool way to operate as just a basic thing. You know what? That's not even true. It's not a cool thing. It's cool if you sign up for it. If you want somebody to produce your record and make creative decisions and you're on the same page about that, then that's totally fine. But I think if you just go to a studio with an engineer expecting to kind of be in charge of your own music, and the engineer starts making all these creative decisions for you, that's maybe not so called for. So I like to collaborate with the musicians I work with, but try to leave decisions up to them as much as possible, and just give them my opinion if they want it. Tell us more about your recording studio. Menegroth 1000 Caves is the name of the studio, and it's in Queens, New York City. And I have a decent-sized live room, control room, and then 3 small ISO booths, one of which I'm in right now. The setup, I guess I do recordings that use all the rooms, recordings where the whole recording is done just in the live room, as if the group is just doing a practice or a show. So there's a lot of flexibility in how I track people, totally isolated, totally together with bleed, everything in between. What's your favorite piece of gear that you own? I am not someone who's good at answering the what's your favorite question. My opinions are always changing. I have some microphones like the AKG 414, which was one of the first 2 microphones I bought ever, and just because it was all I had, I used it a ton in the early years, and then I kind of got sick of it and put it away for years, and then came back to it and now use it all the time again for certain things. So yeah, there's no favorite. It's always changing. Everything has its use. The shittiest piece of equipment all the way up to the most expensive. The ideas, the music, that's always way more important than the gear. The crappiest sounding recording of the best music always wins over the best sounding recording of the crappiest music, obviously. What's your composing method? Do you follow different methods for your projects, or there's something that connects everything? There's no particular method. Sometimes I'll have a specific idea and run with it. Other times there won't be any idea, and I'm just fumbling around and something comes and then I work with that. I'm educated about music theory, but I don't really use it as a compositional tool, so to speak, unless you maybe count every now and then I'll have a melody or a riff that's 12 tone. And I suppose that's sort of a music theory used as a compositional tool, but it doesn't usually get too much deeper than that. And I don't even play by all the rules of serialism. I usually just make a 12-tone row, and that's it. It's just a way to make something that's a little bit less conventional sounding. I think with the different groups I play in, maybe the compositional method is more writing music that will sound good when combined with the styles of the musicians I collaborate with. So the longer I play with the same musicians, like the longer I play with Kevin and Jeff, the more I know what kind of thing I can write that maybe Jeff can do something cool with. And maybe I won't write something for Lev that I would write to play with Jeff because their styles are so different. Things like that. But that's not really a method. That's just kind of like, what is that? That's just being hopefully a good band member. And thinking about the other people you're playing with rather than just kind of mindlessly writing a song and then giving it to other people, which I've had plenty of experience doing that, especially with the early Arctopus material, and then realizing maybe this phrase sounds cool in MIDI, but it's so hard to play well that it doesn't really come across. Or maybe I'll write a drum idea and it doesn't fit in the lexicon of the drummer who's in the band at the time so well, so it doesn't really work that well. Things like that. So I try to be better about that as the years go by. As I know you live in New York, it's the ultimate metropolis, and many of the bands that you produced are from there. Do you think that it's the best place for an avant-garde extreme music lover? I've heard about some lineups that blow my mind. Yes and no. New York is both the best possible place that you could be for music, especially avant-garde experimental music. Maybe for free jazz, Europe is better, or it's just received better. But in terms of the number of people making interesting, extreme experimental music here, I haven't. It seems to me that it's probably the highest concentration of that. But I also live here and have more of I know more people here, so that's probably coloring perception of it. The sense in which it is not the best is that it is an incredibly expensive and competitive city in terms of working and making enough money to get by and having the time to make your experimental music. And there's tons of venues for all kinds of music, so in that sense, New York is great, but that also has the opposite, that also has a negative effect where attendance at shows is not good for experimental music here. On average, it's just 5 people at the shows. For metal, definitely way stronger of an audience in New York, but still there's such a high concentration of bands and of shows happening every night that you either have to pick and choose what you go and see, or a lot of times you just feel so oversaturated with the amount of music going on that you just end up staying home and watching TV or something. Because you've already been to 6 shows this month. Or maybe you just went to 6 shows last month and this month you're not going to shows. So yeah, it's a mixed bag in terms of being a very supportive environment for extreme and experimental music, but also being a really tough place just because it's expensive to live here and there's so many musicians. I hate to combine the word competition with music, but if we're saying that it's competition having a lot of musicians making the same kind of music, then there is more competition here. Have you planned some trip tour dates in Italy? What do you think about our country and our metal music scene? Do you listen to some? Well, I just had to go bust out the Putridity shirt for this question. I have been to Italy before. That was the first country in Europe I ever went to when I was a teenager for like a class trip. But I also, on my first European tour with Behold the Octopus in 2008, we played a couple shows in Italy that I have super fond memories of. So yeah, I love going there. Italy is also obviously an amazingly fertile ground for the arts since the beginning of civilization. One of my favorite visual artists is Italian, Giovanni Di Paolo, from the early Renaissance. He almost has a psychedelic type of approach to some of his work, and I've used a couple of his pieces as album covers for Intricate Theater. Classical music, huge. From Italy, one of my favorite composers is Gesualdo. Horrible person, obviously, but his music's incredible. Chelsea, amazing 20th century composer. Luciano Berio, another one of my favorite 20th century composers. His sequenzas were really important pieces for me growing up and influenced Behold the Octopus a lot. Metal, Putridity, of course, and Paolo's couple also sings in a bunch of other bands, but I've been listening to the Esophageal record a lot, which is killer, and the Interminable Corruptions, Interminable Corruptions album that he sings on too, which is excellent. And then of course there's all the awesome prog from Italy, like Goblin and Zoo, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a ton of other things, but yeah, Italy rules. Buddies from Nero de Marte, another awesome band who Gorguts has gotten to tour with twice, once in the States and once in Europe. Those guys are awesome buddies and great musicians. One more thing I forgot to say about Italian bands. I recently had the pleasure of recording the band Seventh Genocide from Rome, who actually made the trip all the way to New York to record at my studio, which was really awesome. And great band, really nice dudes, and it was all their first time in the States. So it was I'm sure like a experience that they'll remember. And yeah, they were just an absolute pleasure to record, and I got to go see them play at a club in Brooklyn too while they were here. That was a lot of fun. So shout out to those guys. Yeah, Italy.
Okay, so the question is, in my opinion, the extreme and avant-garde bands brought back in death and black metal what was missing a lot, the sense of Lovecraftian concept about the fear of the unknown. What do you think about this statement? And can you tell us your opinion about the evolution of this extreme scene in the last 2 years? How do you live, feel in it, and are you happy about it? So I think that I agree with a lot of what you're saying, because once a style of music becomes codified and certain expectations are established, you do lose some of that sense of the unknown and not really feeling like you know where you're going and what to expect. And obviously, the root of fear itself is the unknown. So if you're trying to create an atmosphere of terror or foreboding or darkness, having a degree of unpredictability is pretty important, I think. So that's where I think an avant-garde approach fits with extreme metal quite well. If the definition of avant-garde is do something non-traditional, something new, going out on a limb and trying something unconventional, then that's a perfect companion to a sense of the unknown and a feeling of uncomfortable, disconcerting fear. Now, to be clear, fear in the arts and fear in real life are two very different things, and nobody really wants, fear of real life in their life. But because we're talking about the arts, this is a whole different category, and it's a abstraction of these emotions, and in a sense, a great way to deal with the acceptance of some of these emotions that you might feel in your real life, to sort of deal with them and work through them through something artistic as opposed to through reality. I'd much rather be engaged by a dark, forbidding artistic statement than a dark, forbidding actual life experience. And it's not even like reality versus the arts are sort of mirror images of each other. They're just different events, and artistic statements are not in the same category. It's hard to make a statement about the last 2 years specifically because everyone's artistic statements operate somewhat on a delay of when you come up with an idea to when it's actually realized and then released out into the world and then consumed by listeners and reflected upon. A good example is a project that I'd heard of for a long time but never really got around to actually investigating is Gnaw Their Tongues from the Netherlands. And the guy that does that project has been making extremely interesting, super dark, avant-garde, metallic statements now for, 30 years or something. And even if you only took his material starting from 2008 on, that's still, a solid 12 years and probably 30 or 40 albums worth of really interesting, dark, experimental, metal-informed, and sometimes straight metal music. So I don't even know, like as somebody who's very deep in this world, there can still be some incredibly heavy hitter like this guy that I didn't get around to until now. So the last 2 years seems very hard to speak on. But I will say that I'm glad that there is some sort of an audience for the really esoteric and avant-garde arts, musical arts specifically out there now, and to be involved with it, and also to sort of accept that I'm never going to know about all of it, and no one is. And that's kind of cool. That's exciting. I like the fact that there's always going to be more to explore and to find, and that makes it fun to be alive now, and to have access to the internet and YouTube and Bandcamp and all these different ways we have to research music and art that we didn't have for most of human culture. It's so quick to investigate things. So really the only impediment we have now to learning about new things is the overwhelming amount of material that's out there. We're digging through a huge, huge pile of work to find what interests us. But I'd rather have a huge pile and the feeling of, oh, wow, there's a lot to dig through than that there's no one I can relate to and there's no one else doing anything that speaks to me. So in that sense, there couldn't be a better time before now than now for the world of specifically hard to find and hard to digest artistic material.
To end this interview properly, can you tell us a joke? Joke. Donald Trump is the President of the United States. I didn't say it was going to be a funny joke. I just said it was going to be a joke.